What up, YouTube? Today we're going to be going over my top 5 favorite vehicles of all time. Stay tuned. Alright, kicking us off at number 1, we have none other than the 2003 to 2006 Ford GT. This car is by far my favorite car of all time. And I'm actually going to make a separate video about why this car is my favorite car of all time. However, I'll go into a brief little bit of detail here on this particular car. Ford just happens to be my favorite brand of all time. Now, granted, some of their newer stuff's not so good. I will admit that. I will be the first to admit that. However, throughout the long history of the brand, they've had a lot of cool shit. And so, I think the Ford GT, being the supercar that represents Ford as a brand, is just excellent in my opinion. But like I said, we're going to go into more detail on that particular vehicle in another video, so stay tuned for that. Second favorite vehicle ever has got to be the 1956 to 1957 Continental Mark II. This particular vehicle is the second in the series of the Mark series lineup from Lincoln, although this was one of the few periods of time, well really the only period of time, where Continental was actually its own separate brand, separate from Lincoln. They tried to make it the top of the line car brand from Ford. Now that didn't last too long. However, when you compare this vehicle to the one that came before it, as well as some of the vehicles that came after it, it was truly ahead of its time. It looked like a car that was 20 years newer than it actually was. And on top of that, this was one of the most expensive cars, inflation adjusted, that Ford had ever sold. They sold for about $10,000 each, and Ford lost money on every single one they sold. However, I personally am a really big fan of the spare tire hump styling on the back of the trunk that the Mark series had throughout the years, and this particular one has the most aggressive spare tire hump of them all. I encourage you to go check one out for yourself. They are a very, very nice looking car. They come with leather, AC, heat, all the bells and whistles for the late 50s that you could possibly get, but it looked like a car from the mid 70s, and it had many of the same technology features that some of those newer cars did. Like I said, they were way ahead of their time, and now today they go for around $150,000 to $200,000 depending on condition. So had you bought one of those and you were still alive, of course, you would have made excellent return on purchasing that vehicle. Also, Ford GT, our number 1 spot, has definitely increased in value as well. And at number 3, we have the Boss 429 Mustang. I don't know the exact years that they made this vehicle, but I do know that it was roughly the 1968 to 1972-ish era, and I know that because the 429 is a smaller version of the 460, which is found in my 1969 Lincoln Continental. So basically, you take a small version of that engine and you put it in a smaller car with the Mustang body, and there you go. It was the biggest engine that ever went into a production Mustang, and I believe it is a 7-liter. And I must say, those old school body style Mustangs with a 7-liter engine, that's pretty badass, I must say. The body styling of that particular Mustang is one of my favorite of all Mustangs. Plus, like I said, when it comes to muscle cars, the biggest engine is the best engine. That's how they looked at it back then, So the 7-liter inside the Mustang is freaking huge, and it's awesome. So that's why the Boss 429 Mustang from the late 60s, early 70s is my 3rd favorite car. On to number 4. The 4th one is going to be from a time period when I was born, roughly. It's going to be the 1993 Fox Body 5.0 Mustang. Yet another Mustang on our list. This is more of like the daily driver. You can drive it more often than that 429. And, you know, I've always liked this because my first vehicle, the 1991 Mercury Grand Marquis, had pretty much the exact same engine as this car, but with a whole lot of extra weight to slow it down. So, you know, my first car almost sort of felt like it had the essence of this car, but it just, you know, wasn't quite there. I loved my first car, don't get me wrong, but the proper car that engine is supposed to go in would have been much cooler, I must say. I like the 93 specifically because it was the newest year of that particular body style, and I think that it's one of the only ones with a sunroof. I know the 80s ones had a sunroof too, but I think they finally started doing power sunroof. I could be wrong, but I just think that the GT hatchback with the sunroof, all black, it's a really awesome car, and I'd love to have one day. Who knows, maybe one day we'll build one of those on the channel after this 69 Lincoln's done. You never know. Kind of hard to find one these days, let alone a stock one, though, so who knows. But moving on to the next one. And number 5 is going to be the 1997 to 1998 Lincoln Mark 8. This was basically the second gen, if you will, of the Lincoln Mark 8. Yet another Mark series vehicle on our list here. This was the newest of the Mark series, and it's actually the newest two-door Lincoln that they ever made. After 1998, there were no more two-door Lincoln vehicles sold, and it is yet, just a two-door V8 car made by Ford. It kind of seems to be the trend here. All of my vehicles happen to fit that criteria, but the Mark 8 in particular, one of my favorite things about it is the wraparound dash. The dash, like the radio and the climate control, kind of faces towards the driver. It's one of my favorite features of the vehicle. Plus, it has the 4.6 liter dual overhead cam Intech V8, one of the most powerful V8s that Ford made at the time. It's actually the same engine found in the Mach 1 Mustang of the time. So one day I definitely plan to actually acquire one of these cars. This is one of the more realistic, I could actually get this car. So I definitely do plan on getting a Mark 8 one day in life. That would be pretty awesome. Definitely something on my bucket list, if you will. All of these cars, for the most part, I prefer them to be black in paint, and I think that's the way they look the best. However, with the Ford GT, our number 1 slot, I do like the white racing stripes with it. So that is number 5. It's going to be the 97 to 98 Lincoln Mark 8. Alright, and that's my top 5 favorite vehicles. Feel free to comment below what your top 5 favorite vehicles are. I'd love to read those and check that out. If you like the video, definitely hit that thumbs up button. Helps me out quite a bit. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel. We're trying to hit 3,000 subscribers soon. We're getting pretty close. Also, if you want to check out more videos on the Andy's Auto YouTube channel, check some of these out right here. And otherwise, I will see you next time. This is Andy, signing off.